Think about what's happened in the last few years. Dave Bratt beats Eric Cantor, the majority leader. There's this group that gets formed on Capitol Hill called the House Freedom Caucus. A sitting speaker steps down midterm, and then the American people say, we're going to make Donald Trump president of the United States. If that's not sending a message to the establishment in this town, I don't know what will. So again, maybe we better think about what the American people are saying via electoral process and do what they sent us here to do. And that's the message for Paul Ryan, but that's a message for all of us. Every member of Congress, every member in the Senate, that's the message. I am really nervous, and I apologize for continuing to harp on this, but if in fact, I mean, Kim Strassel's piece in the Journal, Byron York's piece earlier this month, on was our government complicit with a major party's campaign apparatus in producing an Oppo research document that got turned into an intelligence document that then was presented to the FISA court and used to get warrants to spy on Americans associated with the Trump campaign. If that happened, that is unbelievable. It is true. And right now, we don't know for sure, but the evidence is pointing in that direction, I think, in a pretty strong manner. If that took place, this is the same government that has the ability through NSA and NRO to do all kinds of surveillance, all kinds of spying. This is the same government that a few years ago used the Internal Revenue Service and the power that that agency has over American lives to actively go after people because they didn't like what they stood for. They didn't like that a group of folks were getting together in Timbuktu, Iowa, and as a Tea Party group and talking about the Constitution and talking about electing conservatives. How dare they do that in this great country? So that was the attitude. That all took place. That stuff is scary. And that's why I appreciate the work I get to do on the Judiciary Committee and Oversight Committee, because you get to go after abuses like that by the government of people's fundamental liberties.
Well, some of us wish you'd be chairman of an oversight committee.
Oh, you're kind. We'll see if that's in the future someday, but not right now.
We're taping on the day where you just walked out of the House Judiciary Committee with the Attorney General. You were asking questions that most Americans, I think, are asking, why they can't do more. What do you think about how he reacted to you, and what would you say differently?
Well, I mean, he basically said they're probably not going to do a special counsel. We think there should be a second special counsel to look into all these issues related to Clinton, Comey, Lynch, Fusion GPS, Uranium One. We've called for it 3.5 months ago, we being 20 members of the House Judiciary Committee, and basically said, even though he sent a letter last night saying they're considering it, it sure sounded like from his answers they're not considering it too strongly. And I guess my point is, what's it going to take? I mean, you start going through the facts. You think about summer 2016, James Comey misled the American people. He called the Clinton investigation a matter, not an investigation. As I've said in committee before, last time I checked, he wasn't, director of the Federal Bureau of Matters. So it was definitely an investigation. Why not call it what it is? Loretta Lynch meeting with Bill Clinton on the tarmac. And then afterwards, when it's discovered she had that meeting, just days before Secretary Clinton was to be interviewed by the FBI, she's corresponding with folks and she uses a different name. She uses the name Elizabeth Carlisle. What are you hiding? I mean, all kinds of things. Him taking over the investigation. So we got all that from the summer 2016. And then the stuff we've learned of late relative to what took place around the Uranium One deal in 2009, 2010. And probably most importantly, what happened with the dossier. I mean, this is the part that scares me the most. The Clinton campaign, the Democrat National Committee, a major political party in this country, pays through a law firm, Fusion GPS, to go give money to Russians to get information on Trump. It's basically an Oppo research document. It looks like at the same time the FBI was paying the author of that document, Christopher Steele. And it looks like the FBI used that document as the basis to go in front of the FISA court to get a warrant to spy on Americans associated with the Trump campaign. Now think about that. A major political party finances an Oppo research document. The United States government is paying the person who wrote the document, it looks like, and it also appears that then that document gets turned into an intelligence document and used as the basis to spy on Americans. That's not supposed to happen in this country. That is not supposed to work that way at all. And so what we're saying is all this that took place, James Comey leaks, when he gets fired, leaks a government document to a friend, through a friend to the New York Times, and his goal was to create momentum for a special counsel. Not just any special counsel. It had to be Bob Mueller, his best friend, his mentor, all this. So all this happens, and what we're saying is, let's investigate this with the special counsel, because by definition, Attorney General Sessions is compromised because he said he recused himself from some elements that relate to this. And I think Bob Mueller is compromised because he was the FBI director during the Uranium One deal. Let's name a special counsel. We'll see what happens.
What do we do? Because the mainstream media doesn't cover the facts that you're talking about that lends credibility to where you're trying to lead people.
You sit down with Ginni Thomas and you do interviews where it gets out to the entire world, because you're this great person in the press and this great concern. We do this kind of stuff. You talk about it. I mean, deep down, the American people, they instinctively know when something's not right. They instinctively know that. I think most Americans are understanding that this Mueller special investigation has not, so far nothing has shown any type of wrongdoing by the president in the course of the campaign working with Russia. We found nothing, no evidence thus far, but there's all kinds of evidence that says we know someone tried to influence the election. The Obama Justice Department. Jim Comey sure looked like he tried to. Sure looks like the Clinton campaign working maybe with an FBI that's complicit in putting together this dossier. Looks like that could have been a problem. Again, that's why it needs to be investigated. So we'll just keep talking about it, and I think the American people will get it.
Okay, whether it's on campus or in social media or protests, there's this rising, escalating movement to squelch the free speech of people who are conservatives or people who have traditional values, and calling them haters or bigots or white supremacists. What can Congress do about this rising, escalating free speech problem?
Highlight it. Highlight what's going on. We've done 2 hearings. We're going to do another one. But you got to highlight just how egregious and real this concern is. And you have to highlight it in a way that says it is happening in a larger context. What's happening on campuses where students' rights and certain conservative professors are being attacked, it's happening in the context of, in the last 6 years, where the federal government used the Internal Revenue Service to target people who, for their political beliefs, target conservatives, their free speech rights, where we've learned things potentially in this, where we started with this, where we talked about earlier with this dossier issue, where you could have had the FBI complicit with a major political party working to get opposition research on the opposing party. We don't know if that happened, but it sure looks like it did. So this is the context. Things we've learned that the NSA was involved with. You know, I say this all the time. I think Edward Snowden was a traitor, but that doesn't dismiss what we learned when he revealed what was going on in some of these agencies. So in that context, we now have also on campuses just outright attacks on conservative students and professors who are, well, there was a guy who got in trouble simply for handing out the Constitution. You hand out the Constitution. My dad's in the Gideons, you know, they hand out Bibles on campuses. They're next. They're going to be attacked as well. So it is a big concern, and it is so against what this country is about. And that's why we had a fun hearing. Oh, this is a few weeks back. I guess maybe a few months ago. We had Ben Shapiro and Adam Carolla, and they were great. First, they're funny, and they're sharp guys. It was a fun hearing, and they just, you know, tore apart the left's arguments for these safe zones and trigger warnings and all the stuff that's going on in these campuses. So we're planning on having another hearing in January with some professors who are going to come in and talk about their experience.
So what about a House resolution that highlights what's happening and that Congress wouldn't?
Maybe we should. Yeah, maybe we should. That's a good idea. That's a good idea, and we'll look to do that.
So what's the likelihood that the Trump voters, the conservative voters, are going to be enthusiastic at the end of the year with the must-pass bills that are coming, that they expect a Republican House, a Republican Senate, not Obama, but President Trump will sign?
I think we'll see. I do think it's important to actually pass the tax bill. I've said all along we need tax legislation that does three things. One, actually cuts taxes. 2, simplifies the code. And 3, is conducive to economic growth and job creation. And I think we're moving in that general direction. There's a few things I think might get ironed out here in the next couple of days, but That kind of legislation is important. And then coming back and dealing with Obamacare. I mean, this thing is a disaster for the American people, for families. If you're in the individual market, small group market, having to buy your insurance as a family business owner, or you're not getting it in through a large employer-sponsored plan, it is just so expensive. And so I think that's real important as we move forward. I always say, never forget everything we were told when Obamacare passed. I call them the 9 lies of Obamacare. You like your plan, keep your plan. Like your doctor, keep your doctor. Premiums will decline. The president stood up and said premiums will decline on average $2,500. They told us deductibles will go down. Remember when they told us the website was going to work, right? They told us the website was secure. They told us emergency room visits would decline. And then they told us all these co-ops they created were going to be 24 co-ops they created. And just a few years ago, 3 years ago they started. And to date, 19 of them already went bankrupt. So everything they told us was a lie. And we know it was a lie because remember the name Jonathan Gruber, the architect of Obamacare, according to the New York Times? After it passes, he was giving speeches and saying, yeah, we misled the American people. We lied to the American people. So we know this thing is a terrible legislation. We were elected in 10, 14, and 16 to repeal it, and we've got to get it done. So I think that's important we get that done.
Okay, and talk about the CR and the omnibus, because there's a deal coming that we're already being told Paul Ryan wants to do a DACA deal on. Say more about how we're going to keep bad things off that the public would oppose.
It is so frustrating that Democrats in the Senate can say, unless you increase spending, unless you do what we want, we're going to accuse you all, Republicans, of shutting down the government. We're like, what? What? We've had but that's the scenario where it looks like we're heading to again. And until we're willing to say we're going to stand firm on what we campaigned on, we're going to increase defense spending, we're not going to increase non-defense discretionary spending, we're going to do the right things on policy like dollars for the border security wall, we're going to make sure our pro-life protections are in the legislation, in the appropriation bill, and we're going to stand firm for that. After all, the American people elected us. And that's what we're for. And if you don't like it, Chuck Schumer, and you don't like it, Senate, we'll have a debate and we'll let the American people decide. But instead, it's like, Republicans always are afraid of the shutdown, showdown debate. And it's like, I don't want to shut down the government. I think that's not a good plan. But if the Democrats don't want to fund our troops, don't want to do what we were all elected to do, we Republicans were elected to do by a majority of the people in this country, they don't want to do what President Trump was elected to do, and they want to shut down the government, I'll take that debate, and I think we can win that debate. But if we're afraid to have the debate, if you forfeit before the referee even blows the whistle, you're probably not going to win the game. So I think we got to get ready and have that debate and win the game, but unfortunately, that hasn't been the case thus far.
What needs to happen up here in the Congress to show that voting has consequences, that the issues that people campaigned on are being actually acted on by the Republican Congress and sent to a Republican president?
Well, yeah, no, great question. I think there are two sides to it. One is, from our side, our job's pretty simple. I always say this, we make this job way too complicated. It's pretty basic. Do what you said you would do. Do what you ran on, do what they elected you to do what they sent you here to do. You form this, when you run for office, you say for certain things that you think are going to help the folks you get the privilege of serving. And they say, okay, we like that, and they elect you. Then you got a contract for them. Go do what you said. So that's the job of those of us in elective office. And if we don't, frankly, the American people have a way of saying, like A, B, see you later. They got a way of saying, you're sorry. And that's how it's supposed to work, particularly the House. I mean, you know this, the founders in their wisdom wanted the House to be that body closest to the people. And I tell this to our constituents back home. I say, that's why every 2 years you get a chance to throw me out. That chance, that opportunity every 2 years is a good thing across this country because it keeps us honest. It keeps you coming back, talking to the folks you get the privilege of serving. You get to listen to them. They can ask you questions. They can give you input and influence, and you can have the dialogue you're supposed to have as a representative. So it's a little slightly different in that they're longer term, but that's the beauty of it. So I think the American people have a way of remembering if you didn't do what you said. Our job is to do what we said. 3 things right now, we're 0 for 3. Have we repealed Obamacare? No. Have we cut taxes yet? No, although we're getting close, and that's a good thing. And have we built a border security wall? No. So right now, and there's talk of some kind of DACA amnesty issue, which would be bad. There's talk of some kind of insurance company bailouts, these CSR payments, which would be bad. Look, our job is to do what we said. repeal Obamacare, cut taxes, build the border security wall, stand up for the values and principles that I think make our country special, make sure our military is strong. Those are the kind of things we need to do. And then I would also add in there, we need to reform our welfare system. Because right now we're trapping too many people in this dependency culture, and frankly, on the economic side, on the job creation side, there are lots of jobs out there that people can't find folks to work. Employers can't, and so we need that issue as well as we move forward.
So what do you think Republicans are learning up here about the bloodbath that happened for Republicans in Virginia?
Well, I mean, first of all, it's a year out. I think, part of the message is, a big part of the message is what we talked about earlier. Republicans need to do what they said. And I always say, if you do what you said, it's just a good basic rule to live by in life, keep your promises. If you do what you said and do the policies you campaigned on and you were elected to do, you probably shouldn't have to worry too much about the next election. Just let that sort of take care of itself. Let's just do what we were sent here to do. So I think that's the main message. I mean, think about it. Thus far, like I said earlier, we haven't repealed Obamacare. We haven't cut taxes yet. We haven't built the wall yet. We haven't reformed welfare yet. People are talking about an amnesty bill relative to DACA, and people are talking about bailing out insurance companies. Well, I don't necessarily think that's what we campaigned on. And frankly, if that's what you have to run on, you probably deserve to lose. So let's just get done what we said. Let's do what we promised the voters we're going to do. Let's do what they sent us here to do. You do that, I think things work out. I ran on certain things. Republicans ran on certain things. The same things Donald Trump ran on. Let's do that. And let's work with the president to do what we said. You shouldn't in any way try to run away from the president. He's the president of the United States. American people elected him. And I've been around the president. When you're around him, you cannot help but like the guy. This is the president is committed to, you can tell he genuinely loves this country. You can tell he loves our troops. He loves our men and women who in law enforcement. He loves small business. You can just tell it. And he wants what's best for the country. You can feel that when you're around him. So this idea that you're gonna run away from the president, I don't get that. Let's just do it. Let's all just do what we said, and let's figure out a way to make that happen. Jeepers, it is. We make it way too complicated. People get all this fancy stuff about campaign. Just go do what we said.
Why did some of you have a hearing a meeting that looked like a hearing on the Pakistani IT issue that involved Debbie Wasserman Schultz and what's been happening up here?
I mean, here you had these guys who had this much authority. They had all kinds of folks on the payroll, looked like they weren't doing any work, and they potentially had access to important information. I mean, it's like a movie, because they get caught at the airport trying to wire money and all this. It's like, where's somewhere Tom Cruise is going to pop up in this fact pattern. So yeah, it's important stuff, because in the world we live in today, where there are terrorists who want to do us harm, you got to look at all this information and what took place here. Was it just a simple, kind of just fraud and theft and stealing, or was there something else there? We don't know, but it certainly warrants, I think, some time to, or warrants an investigation and some time to examine all these questions.
This fall, a Politico article came out with John Boehner giving astounding interviews, quite raw, I would say, in which he cussed you out. He called you a legislative terrorist. He had many negative things to say. What do you think the legacy of John Boehner is going to be, and what warning is there in it for Paul Ryan?
Well, I mean, I'll leave legacy up to the history writers and other people. It's not my concern. And look, I made a point throughout my time in Congress, throughout my time in public life, to particularly here in Congress, not to say anything negative about Speaker Boehner or Congressman Boehner. And I'm not going to start now. I think it's unfortunate that I just think it's not healthy for people to use that kind of language and say those kind of things about others. And I said this in the piece, and I do believe it. I actually do feel kind of sorry for people, because it struck me as a little bit bitter. And we all know. I mean, I remember my parents talking to me about, they'd talk about some people they know when they got old, they got sort of angry and bitter, and that's just not healthy for anyone. I don't think the Lord wants us to act that way. I mean, it's like, you know, you should be happy. You're an American, for goodness sake. That's why people say, you know, you can around Washington you can get pessimistic, but you're still optimistic because hey, we live in America. So we'll see. And I wish John Boehner the best in retirement or whatever he's doing now. He's giving some speeches and doing some things, but yeah, I hope he doesn't get bitter in life. That's just not good. Not good for anyone.
Ohio Governor John Kasich in November spoke on a weekend show to Jake Tapper talking about how the Republicans need to stop playing to their base, being negative, being anti-trade, being anti-immigrant, being anti-environment, taking health care away from people. Explain your governor's Republican Party and how it differs from yours.
I think he's missing the point. The point is about, you know, the point is about doing what you were elected to do. This election, real clear. It was about coming here and changing things. It was about repealing Obamacare. It was about cutting taxes so families can keep more of their money. It was about building a border security wall. After all, every sovereign nation should have has the right and should have the ability to decide who's coming in and who's leaving, who's moving across their border. Those are pretty common sense things. I don't think they're like this kind of the Republican or that kind of Republican. It's just like good, basic, common sense things that I think our founders understood and that Americans have historically understood for the 200-some years we've been a country. So I don't like to get into this. I know what I believe. I know when I ran, I believe in trade. I think trade is opportunity to market and sell your goods in as many places as you can. I'm all for that. We have big manufacturing in our district. It sells all over the place. We have big agriculture starting in our district. We're the start of the Corn Belt moving across the Midwest. So that's just good common sense basic economics. I'm for all that. We shouldn't set up this divide in the party. We should be for what's best for the country. I think the positions that I believe in, the party believes in, are what's best for the country, and that's why I run as a Republican. That's why I want to do what we said.